Thank you. Well, good evening, and thank you all for joining us for today's Federal Student Loan Update webinar. We are hosting this webinar today in advance of the July 1st deadline, which will have impacts on your annual federal borrowing limits and your repayment plans. These changes are happening because of decisions that this administration took last year under the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill to restrict higher education access by setting new loan limits and changing repayment options. I opposed that legislation last year, and this year I am a co-sponsor of the Professional Degree Access Restoration Act, which would fully repeal all of the borrowing caps and restrictions for professional and graduate degrees that were enacted with the One Big Beautiful Bill last year. Regardless of the ongoing legislative battles on this issue, I do want to make certain that all of you and your families have the resources you need to better understand your options, prepare for these upcoming shifts, and be able to manage student loan debt with confidence. I thank those of you for tuning in tonight. You're taking the right steps when it comes to ensuring you have the information necessary ahead of the upcoming July deadline for changes to federal student loans. I am indeed so grateful to be joined this evening by Carolina Rodriguez, Director of the Education Debt Consumer Assistance Program, or EDCAP, who will walk you through changes to federal student loans that may impact you or your family and provide resources on these changes. Before I wrap, know that my office is here and ready to assist you with any federal issues. Our door is always open, so please do not hesitate to reach out. And I thank you again, Carolina, for your work informing our community. And thanks for all tuning in tonight. Now, you might have heard the buzzer as I was speaking. That's a call to votes on the House floor. And so I wish I could stay to witness the webinar, but duty calls. But you have my assurances that I'll get all the info we need to move things along for all of our constituents out there. And with that, I'll pass it along to our colleague, my colleague, Cora, our Director of Constituent Services. Cora, welcome.
Thank you, Congressman, and welcome, and have a good evening, and go do what you do so very well. We all appreciate you. Thank you. Thank you for your time. And good evening, everyone. We're here today, as the Congressman said, to really get a good understanding and hopefully a good hold on updates and information, again, on federal student loans. And for someone to help us with this, we have Ms. Rodriguez, who is going to get into a very, very good and, if I may say, juicy PowerPoint that she will share information with. And at the end, if there's still time, then I'll pose a few questions, and then we will thank you for being here. So, Ms. Rodriguez, it is all yours.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I am going to go ahead and share my screen. If you can let me know whether you see my screen. I'm sorry, I'm shifting a little bit. Give me 1 second and I will do full view. So thank you so much. Again, it is a pleasure to be with you. We are going to be covering a lot of information. The good thing is that if at any point you have more questions or you need to speak to someone, we do have free one-on-one assistance through our program, EDCAP. This is an overview of what we're going to cover. As I mentioned, we're going to cover a lot, but rest assured that you will be able to access additional resources after this webinar. I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about EDCAP, the Education Debt Consumer Assistance Program. We are a program of a nonprofit organization called the Community Service Society of New York. CSS has been a longstanding nonprofit organization that advocates to remove barriers that prevent upper economic mobility. In 2019, CSS decided to launch EDCAP because we were finding out that many New Yorkers were faced with higher education debt. In other words, we were seeing that higher education debt was preventing them from attaining the return on investment that they were expecting to get as a result of getting a higher education. So what exactly do we do? Well, with a network of 11 community-based organizations and legal aid groups throughout New York State, we offer comprehensive one-on-one counseling services. We can help New Yorkers understand their best repayment options, whether they have federal loans, private loans, or even institutional debt. If they're eligible for forgiveness, we're going to allow them to walk them through any application and understand the eligibility criteria. If they need to consolidate their loans, which we're going to talk a little bit today about, resolve issues with their servicers or lenders, and if they've fallen behind on their payments, we can help them get out of default to prevent wage garnishment, Social Security offsets, and tax refund intercepts. And in the last 2 years, we've increased our services to cover the preventative side, right? We don't only want to tackle the issue after the fact. We want to make sure the New Yorkers are getting the help that they need in order to address higher education financing. That means helping them apply for federal student aid through FAFSA or state aid through TAP. And then we help them understand their financial aid award letter, because we want to make sure that both students and parents understand the real cost of higher education and make an informed decision. So again, very comprehensive services. You can find more information at edcapny.org, and towards the end of the presentation, you're going to have an entire screen with our contact information and how to get access to the one-on-one counseling. Let's start off with the One Big Beautiful Bill, also referred to as HR1. So it is really changing the landscape for how we borrow to go to college, and that is not only going to impact students, but it's also going to impact parents and how they finance to help support an undergrad's education or degree. So the One Big Beautiful Bill, unfortunately, is going to restrict how much parents can borrow and how much students can borrow as well. But there is this big critical deadline for Parent Plus loan borrowers that I am going to talk about, and that is after July 1st, anyone taking out Parent Plus loans or anyone who did not consolidate their Parent Plus loan are not going to have access to forgiveness, like public service loan forgiveness or income-driven repayment forgiveness. I'm going to talk more about those two programs. They're also not going to have access to a payment based on income. And we are really concerned about that, in part because we know that there could be parents who have high loan balances because they had multiple kids that they had to put through college. So just so you know, if you have Parent Plus loans right now, I'm going to encourage you to reach out to us just for you to understand what is happening with the July 1st deadline. There is a concern at this point that even if you submit a consolidation application as a Parent Plus loan borrower, you may not be able to finalize it on time. You can reach out to our office, and again, you're going to get our contact information, and we can walk you through your options and understand what's going to happen after July. Let's step back a little bit, and this is going to be critical for framing and for all of us to absorb this information. When we think about how do we finance higher education, we're thinking obviously about federal student loans. Federal student loans are provided by the federal government, the U.S. Department of Education. They are generally great because they have fixed interest rates, and they give you access, for the most part, to payments based on income and forgiveness programs. In addition to public service loan forgiveness and income-driven repayment forgiveness, there are many other forgiveness programs the federal government provides for you to be able to discharge or get some or all of your student loan debt forgiven. The types of loans included in the federal system you often hear as subsidized and unsubsidized and plus loans. I am going to talk a little bit more about the different types, but again, the big takeaway here, if you ever have a subsidized loan, which is usually given to an undergraduate student, that means that while you're in school, it's not accumulating interest. So that's a really good function of a subsidized loan. Unsubsidized means that you start accumulating interest after the loan is disbursed. And plus loans have traditionally been available to help parents cover the cost of an undergraduate education for a dependent. And plus graduate plus loans have been available to cover up to the cost of attendance for anyone going to graduate school, whether it was a master's, a PhD, law school, medical school. There was no differentiation. You could borrow up to the cost of attendance in plus loans, -8, of course. Then we have the second type of borrowing, and those are private loans. Now, private loans, you are using your traditional mechanism, meaning you're going to a private lender. Usually it's going to be a credit union, banking institution. Nowadays, you can do a quick search and you'll see a host of private lenders. Those loans are still going through the school in a sense, because the school has to verify that you're going to college and that you have the need to be able to get that loan. Now, unlike federal loans, which don't generally require a credit check, private loans do require a credit check. And I can tell you from my experience, if you're going to undergrad and you still need to borrow a private loan, chances are you're going to need a cosigner. Very few 18, 19, 20, 21-year-olds have the job history or the credit history to be eligible for a private student loan. The challenge there is that at that point, once you have a cosigner, both the student and the cosigner are 100% liable on that debt. The other thing about private loans is that they don't have the same protections that federal student loans have, right? In other words, with a private loan, you cannot get access to payments based on income generally, and you don't have access to forgiveness programs. So those are two big drawbacks. Private loans also have interest rates that could be fixed and some that could be variable. So it's very, very important, especially in the new landscape, that number one, private loans should be your last resort. And if you are going to look to borrow a private loan, you really, really need to understand the terms and conditions, like the interest rate. Is it fixed? Is it variable? And what is your repayment period, for you to understand the implications once you finish school. The other type of aid or financial loans, so to speak, can come from the state. New York State does not currently have a state loan, and some higher education institutions, some colleges and universities may have their own lending system where you may be able to borrow a loan to cover your cost of your education. The terms and conditions are going to vary widely. So again, the key takeaway, you want to avoid debt as much as possible. We recognize that that is often not the case, that you cannot avoid it. If you have to choose, you want to still choose federal loans. Private loans should be last priority. If you're getting a state-based or institutional loan, you still want to understand the terms and conditions so you can be aware of what that's going to look like once you are finished with school. So let's dive into undergrad. How do we pay for undergrad now and moving forward? I think that is a big change that we're going to see, not only undergrad, but graduate. So right now, up until now, if you were going to an undergrad program, you would be able to borrow as the student up to $31,000. Each year, your freshman year, you would be able to borrow up to $5,500, and the second year it would go up a little bit, but the max that you would be able to borrow is $31,000. That is still the case. So OBBBA did not change how much you as a student borrower can borrow for your undergrad education. The interest rate is 6.39 right now, so you can get a sense. Now, a big change for undergrad students that are taking out loans for themselves is that they're now going to have only two repayment plan options. One repayment plan option based on income, and that is known as the RAP plan, Repayment Assistance Program, or the standard repayment plan. The standard repayment plan simply means that you're going to pay back based on your loan balance, the interest rate, in a predetermined payback period. Depending on your loan balance, that is how long you're going to have to repay back the loan. In other words, if your loan balance is higher, they'll give you up to 25 years to repay it. If it's lower, they will give you less time. So again, the big takeaway is that if you're going to undergrad, you as a student can continue to borrow what you have traditionally been able to borrow, up to 31,000. You will, however, moving forward, anyone who takes out a new loan after July 1st is going to only have two repayment plan options. If you're wondering what are currently the repayment plan options, I can say that we currently have a lot of repayment plan options based both on income and under what we consider a standard or traditional repayment plan. So just to showcase here, the example that I was providing about the cap, that is if you are a dependent student. If you are an independent student, you can borrow more, and that is an acknowledgement that you have more to cover. You're going to be more liable for your own expenses. So you can see here that as an undergrad, as a freshman, the limit is $5,500 for the dependent student and the independent $9,500, and it goes up every year. So again, undergrad borrowing does not change for the student. However, here's a big impact. It does change for parents. So if you were going to undergrad and you as a student could only borrow 31,000, but let's say your cost of attendance was 50,000 or 60,000, then your parent could borrow in Parent Plus loans whatever else was needed up to the cost of attendance. But moving forward after July 1st, that is no longer going to be the case. A parent will be able to borrow up to 20,000 per year with a lifetime limit of 65,000 per student. So if I have two kids going to college, my yearly is 20,000 per year and 65 per student. And that is a big change. Now, Parent Plus loans generally, to backtrack a little bit, do tend to have higher interest rate. Sometimes parents think that it's better for them to take a private loan because the interest rate may be lower in the private market. The big takeaway is that if you need to borrow, we still recommend in general federal loans, in part because they come with more repayment options traditionally and access to forgiveness programs. Now, moving forward after July 1st, in addition to this cap, Parent Plus loan borrowers are no longer going to have access to forgiveness, and they're not the two main forgiveness programs, PSLF and income driven repayment, and they're going to be subjected to one repayment plan, and that is the standard repayment plan. So again, it's going to be very hard for Parent Plus loan borrowers or parents to finance whatever else they may need. So early planning is critical at this stage. Our recommendation is parents who are trying to put their undergrad students through college should get a consultation. Again, you can reach out to us. All of our services are free. Because you want to have a game plan, you want to make sure that you're not going to be in trouble, and you understand how much you're really going to need to borrow. Now, one thing to remember is if anyone right now is in college and they still need more time to finish their degree, there is a grandfathering provision through HR1, the One Big Beautiful Bill, and they will allow you to take up to the cost of attendance for 3 additional years. However, any Parent Plus loan borrower who takes out a loan after July or who has direct loans and didn't consolidate by this deadline will still have access only to the standard repayment plan and no access to the two key forgiveness programs that I mentioned. I'm going to step back even more here to put this into perspective of what this new loan caps really mean for families, right? So as I mentioned, let's assume you're a dependent undergraduate student trying to start school after July 1st of this year. Let's assume that you as a dependent student can borrow the max, right? The 5,500 the first year and so forth. The parent can borrow 20,000 max per year. So you can see here that overall for the first year, combining the student and the parent, they would be able to borrow 25,500. It goes up a little bit. So you maybe have like a good feeling about the first 3 years. Although I can say that housing expenses alone can be 20,000. That's not including tuition and related expenses. Where we're going to run into a big issue is going to be that 4th year where the parent will only have, assuming they borrow 20,000 each of the first 3 years, 5,000 remaining. So you can see there the issue that some parents may face, and they really need to plan ahead to make sure that they understand, one, how much they're borrowing, and two, what is going to be that loan cap that they're going to have to face. Now, if a parent only borrow 10,000 the first year, they could use that in the 4th year, but at no point can they borrow more than 20,000 per year. And I think that is very important because I feel some parents may be thinking, well, the cap is 65,000, so I can borrow 30,000 the year that I really need it. That is not the case. There's a yearly and there's a max cap. The yearly for Parent Plus loans is going to be 20,000. The lifetime max per student is 65,000. Again, my biggest concern is early planning because, as I mentioned, housing and food expenses can easily be 20,000, even at a public and state institution. So be aware of these changes moving forward. Now, a more controversial topic is paying for graduate school. And similar to Parent Plus loan restrictions, The Graduate Plus program is actually being completely eliminated. In other words, people are not going to be able to borrow what they need, and they're going to face these new loan caps. I have here the new loan caps. So if you're going to go get a master's or even a PhD, and I'll make sure that I fix this, I keep forgetting to fix this, it could be a PhD. If it's a normal degree, graduate degree, the most that you're going to be able to borrow under your own name, and I should say, a parent cannot take out loans to pay for a son's, daughter's going to grad school. A parent can only borrow plus loans to pay for an undergraduate education, okay? So when you are trying to go to graduate school, if you're going to borrow federal loans, it's all on you, it's all under your name. Moving forward after July 1st, your max per year is going to be $20,500 with a lifetime limit of $100,000. So if you're going to a master's program, you're only going to be able to borrow $20,500 per year, right? Despite this lifetime limit, it's only going to be the $20,500. Now, where it got a little bit more controversial, it's on the professional degree. The final rules stipulate, and I'll show you what those categories are, that if you're going to a professional degree as they define it, you're going to be able to borrow $50,000 with a lifetime limit of $200,000. Now, what is the challenge here? I can tell you from experience with clients, if you're going to medical school, the medical school from beginning to end is going to be a lot more than $200,000. If you're going to law school, I've seen averages of 250,000. Some of that includes undergrad, right? So we're facing a little bit of a crisis, and I am personally concerned because that's going to impact our workforce pipeline or diversity pipeline. We want to make sure that people who want to get higher education in high needs areas, especially, are able to access the resources that they need. And again, this federal loan caps are going to make it harder. So we really appreciate Congressman Tonko's advocacy in this effort, because again, it's going to restrict so many people that are very talented, that would be amazing professionals. Now, I'm going to echo the same grandfather clause here, and that is, if you are currently in a graduate program, whether it's a master's, PhD, or law school, medical school, you can continue to borrow up to the cost of attendance for the next 3 years to complete the degree, right? So be aware of that you can still borrow. Now, if you take out more loans after July 1st, similar to undergrads, your only two repayment plan options is going to be a RAP based on income and the new standard plan. So be aware that while you are grandfathered in, if you're currently in a program, your repayment plan options are going to be restricted to two. You, as a student, as a graduate student taking out loans for yourself, can still access forgiveness like public service loan forgiveness and income-driven repayment forgiveness. Now, this is the list, the controversial list. I'm sorry, let me go back here. So these are the degrees or categories, I should say, that met the definition of professional degree. As I mentioned, there was a lot of controversy, especially on social media, about like nursing, right? Nursing is such a critical area that to limit them on what they can borrow, for example, it's going to have real repercussions. You will get, we will share this presentation, but you can see here that it's very specific degrees, and many others are going to be left out unless something is done. Now, let me quickly talk about the maximum lifetime federal borrowing. We have this, that you can take out up to $257,500 in federal student loans as a maximum cap. Very, very few people are going to meet that. In order for you to be able to borrow this maximum lifetime cap, you needed to be an independent student and taken out the most in undergrad loans as an independent student. And then you needed to go to a professional degree and taking out the 200,000, right? So very few people are going to meet this. People are just going to be more restricted with the annual loan caps that I just discussed, right? The 20,500 and the 50,000 for professional, and 20,000 in general for grad. So you may see this lifetime cap. It's a little deceiving. As I mentioned, you would have to be borrowing the max as an independent and then going to a professional degree. going for a professional degree. So most people are going to be less. Now, let me quickly shift over to private loans. I know I provided a little bit. We are again a little bit concerned that more people are going to be forced to look at private loans as an option. And as I mentioned, despite the new restrictions on payments, the new restriction for Parent Plus and forgiveness programs, federal loans are still better, in my opinion, than private loans. Because if you ever decide to, let's say, refinance, get a private loan to pay off your federal, you can do it. We rarely advise it because there's so many benefits to the federal loans, and I'll talk more about those benefits. But if you take out a private loan, you cannot send it back into the federal system, right? So if you have a federal loan, you can refinance and get a private loan to pay off the federal loan. But if you have a private loan, you cannot get a federal loan after the fact to pay off that private loan. One of the big perks about federal loans is that if you become disabled, you can apply for total and permanent disability discharge. If you are facing economic hardship and you need a little bit of breathing room where you may be like, I need 3 months where I don't have to pay my loans, you can get a forbearance or you can get a deferment. So there's just so much more flexibility embedded in federal loans that it's not in private loans. So again, just to recap, if you're going for an undergrad degree, chances are you're going to need a cosigner. If you're going to go to graduate school and you're not working, chances are you're also going to need a cosigner. Be aware of that. Your cosigner is only going to be allowed to borrow what their profile allows them to borrow, right? In other words, if you are going to have your dad cosign and your dad already has other liabilities, other debts, mortgage, a car, and all that, even if they wanted to, they might not be able to co-sign on the amount you're going to need. And it's hard for people to plan because you don't know what you're going to be eligible to borrow until you apply. Just be aware that you want to have a plan game A, B, and C, because this issue of if I have to borrow and if I need a co-signer is probably going to come up. Again, I've already talked about this, about my warning signs. There are going to be people that are not going to be able to avoid private loans. Just do it with caution. Now, where do you get a list of private loans? We will not steer you into any private loan. We are unbiased, neutral. Your schools can actually not steer you into any private loan. They would be violating, I'm sure, some federal and state rules. However, your schools may have a lender list, and that should be available on their website. You can always reach out to the financial aid office of the school you're planning to go to get some vendor lists. You can nowadays do your own research. We generally suggest that you get a couple of quotes just to see if you can get better terms and conditions. Again, you can apply on your own if you're the student, but chances are if you don't have the work history, credit worthiness, you may need a cosigner. On this slide, we have the pros and cons of both federal and private loans, which, as I mentioned, I've probably emphasized quite a bit. So I'm going to move on. One thing that you want to do, and we're not steering you to use our tools, you can use any tool available out there. There's amazing tools out there where you can compare college costs, right? So once you get your financial aid award letter, we really, really encourage you to put it into a calculator so you can see the end cost. Why do I say that? A lot of schools will say, congratulations, we're giving you a scholarship of 100,000, and you are over the moon and you think it's the best news ever. Well, one, they might have very concrete restrictions where you must maintain a certain GPA, and those 100,000 are for the 4 years, not per year. So I've heard in my practice horror stories where people didn't read the fine print, the terms and conditions, and went for that school only to have to transfer out because it was truly unaffordable. And then they ended up with debt, and it's just not a good scenario. It will be now more than ever imperative for you to really do that analysis from an affordability perspective and figure out which school is going to work out best. The last thing you want to do is go to a school where you're not going to be able to afford it, and then either you're going to transition out, or worst case scenario, end up with a direct to school debt bill, right? That is never good. We also have on our website a projected repayment planner. A lot of times, we just focus on the first year without considering what is the long-term effect of borrowing. And so this calculator allows you to plug in some information and you can project total cost if you end up borrowing whatever you end up borrowing per year. Okay. I know I say a lot and hopefully people are following along. I'm going to now transition to the new repayment plan rules. In addition to the federal loan caps that I just mentioned, the options when it comes to how you pay your federal student loans is changing drastically. I want to start off with the SAFE plan. And for those of you who are just going to go to college, this is not going to ring bell, which is okay. But if you've been in repayment, this may very well apply to you. Under the Biden administration, there was a plan that was created known as SAVE. And that plan did offer very generous, a very generous repayment, meaning it was truly affordable for people. People could see the light at the end of the tunnel. They could balance their budget. It was really great. That got litigated in court, and it is basically now eliminated. It is, as you see there, RIP, rest in peace, the SAFE plan. Right now, anyone who has been on the SAFE plan had a SAFE forbearance. A forbearance simply means in the federal system that you don't have to repay when you're on that forbearance status. So for the last 2 years, literally 2 years as of July, people on the SAFE plan didn't have to make a payment. The current administration has issued preliminary notice that everyone on SAFE, and there are 7 million nationally borrowers on SAFE, will need to get out of SAFE and choose another repayment plan. I can tell you that right now, that is the number one request for appointments we are getting. People who think that they have to do this by July, which is good that they're taking action, but I want to rest assured anyone who's on the SAFE plan, your servicer is actually going to notify you and give you a plan switch date. In other words, they're going to let you know your deadline to switch from SAFE. As you can imagine, switching 7 million people from one repayment plan to other repayment plans, it's a big task. There's a lot of paperwork involved, processing, and servicers probably don't have the capacity to do it all at once. So it is my understanding that anyone on SAFE is going to get that notice at some point in July from the servicer. You're going to have an end date. You just need to switch plans by that end date. I'm going to talk a little bit more about SAFE and what to do and look for. So don't stress too much, but please pay attention to any servicer notice. Who is your servicer? Your servicer is the entity hired by the Department of Education or contracted by the Department of Education to manage your loans. If you don't know who your servicer is, you can find out by going to your studentaid.gov account. When you log into your studentaid.gov account, on the right-hand corner, it's going to tell you who your servicer is. If you haven't created an account or if you have not logged into your servicer account, please do so. You may be missing out correspondence, and arguably some people who might not have inter-repayment and were not on SAFE may actually have a balance due right now. So be aware of that. If you're going to transition from SAFE, again, you're going to have more repayment plan options. If you don't want to transition yet because you want to buy a little bit more time, that is fine. You can just wait for that official notice. Now, on our website, we have this calculator. And this calculator includes an estimate of the new repayment plan that it's going to be available, known as RAP. That plan is not available right now. It should be available next month. How early? We're hoping July 1st, but we don't know. So if you're switching from SAFE, your eligibility will depend on the loans you have and when you took them out. Here's my general advice. When you go and run the IDR application, which you can do right now, you can go to loan repayment at studentaid.gov and select income-driven repayment. Run the application. You don't have to submit it. I recommend you run the application and provide the IRS retrieval approval for you to match your income information. The federal government is going to use your most recent tax filing. So if you file your 2025, they will use that income information. It's line 11, your adjusted gross income. Now, if you didn't file 2025, they will still use 2024. If you haven't filed in the last 2 years, they're going to ask you for proof of income. If your income has significantly decreased, then they're going to ask you to provide updated proof of income. If you're not working, then you can attest, that you're currently have no taxable income. They may still require a letter or additional paperwork. Now, when you run the IDR application, if you're transitioning from SAVE, if your goal is forgiveness, whether it's public service loan forgiveness or income-driven repayment forgiveness, then you can choose the cheapest plan option that you get from there. And it's either going to be IBR, ICR, and for some of you, it may be payee. Again, you can use our calculator to cross-reference what you're getting. RAP, a little bit about RAP. RAP is actually a good payment if your income, I want to say, don't quote me on this, is below like 80,000. Once your income is 80,000 or more, it may be more expensive than what I am seeing under IBR or pay. This is going to be different for everyone, so don't quote me on it. This is from my observations and based on how the formulas work. IBR, pay, ICR have different formulas than RAP. RAP is very generous for lower income. It gets more expensive for a little bit higher income. Once you reach that 80, 75, 80 threshold, 85, it may be more expensive. If you are pursuing public service loan forgiveness, again, you can choose any of these repayment plans. They will count. Now, pay and ICR are going to go away in 2028, but that's okay. That's 2 more years that you could use them if that's an affordable repayment plan. The standard repayment plan, which I'll talk a little bit more about, this is the new one that it's going to become available after July, and that's going to be the only option for Parent Plus loan borrowers who take out Parent Plus loans or who have direct Parent Plus loans after July. Here's a big picture overview. I already kind of repeated all of this, but here's a summary. I recommend if you're on a computer screen, I would probably take a picture of this so you can have it. If you're going to borrow more loans after July 1st, 2026, you're only going to have 2 repayment plan options. You're either going to be paying based on this new tier standard repayment plan or based on income under the RAP plan. That is it. If you take out a loan after July 1st, those are your 2 only options. If you're not taking out more loans, you will be considered a legacy borrower. And if you're a legacy borrower, you're going to have more options. You're going to be able to choose between IBR, RAP, payee, and ICR. As I mentioned, both payee and ICR are going to go away by 2028, but you still get 2 years. You would also have access to the traditional plans. The traditional plans are what we call a standard fixed, graduated, and extended. Standard, you pay back within a certain period. Graduated, it goes up every 2 years. Extended, you just get more time to pay it. Now, the big takeaway, if you're a Parent Plus loan borrower, if you take out any new loan after July 1st, 2026, the standard repayment plan is your only repayment and you don't have access to forgiveness based on PSLF or income-driven repayment. You may still have access to other discharge programs like total and permanent disability discharge. Now, if you successfully consolidated your loans, meaning the loan consolidation was disbursed, finalized by June 30th, before July 1st, you can go into ICR, make 1 payment, and then switch to IBR. ICR and IBR are both repayment plans based on income. IBR traditionally is cheaper than ICR. Not in every case, there's always an exception, but generally. If you don't take out more loans, you should still have access to some of those traditional standard plans. Again, this is the biggest change for borrowers. It will be Parent Plus loans. And if you're taking out new loans after July, if you are not taking out more loans and you fall under this legacy, you have a lot more options. Honestly, your repayment plan depends on your strategy. I'll talk about strategies. Okay. This is the new tier standard repayment plan. So if you're taking out more loans, you'll have access to this. If you have Parent Plus loans, this is the only plan that you're going to be eligible for. As I mentioned, under this new tier standard repayment plan, you're going to get a repayment period based on the loan balance you took out. So if you took out $52,000, you would get up to 20 years to pay it off. Now, can you pay it off sooner? Absolutely. Nothing prevents you from paying off your federal student loans sooner than what you're required. If you only took out 20,000, then you would have 10 years to repay it. If you took out more than 100,000, you would have 25 years to repay it. So you're going to see here that depending on the loan that you have, that's the time period that you're going to have to repay. There will be a minimum payment of $50. That is, if you only took a few $1,000s, at minimum, you must pay $50 if it's going to be lower than that. As I mentioned, anyone enroll in the tier standard plan, this plan doesn't qualify you for forgiveness programs like PS11 income driven repayment. If you want a tier standard plan, either you're automatically placed in the standard plan by the servicer, or you can enroll by contacting your student loan servicer. This is for the standard plan. These are some examples. So for example, here, if you borrow $25,000, your repayment period could be up to 15 years. Your monthly payment will be $218, and you can see here how much you would pay in interest and how much you would pay total. If you borrow 100,000, you have 25 years to repay it. Your monthly payment could be 675 and up. But clearly, if you borrow that much, you're basically paying like twice as much in interest because you're paying over 25 years. One thing I want to mention, and this example is based on a 6.5 interest rate. One thing I want to mention is that a lot of people have this notion that student loans are different than other type of loans. And I always say they're probably the worst type of debt because there's no statute of limitations, meaning the federal government can pursue you for the end of your time to collect on it. They are dischargeable upon death, which is really good. So if you die, you die, the loans die with you, they don't get charged off to your estate. But one thing that I find a lot is people don't realize that it's like any other consumer debt, meaning you are generating interest every month. And so if your payment is not even paying the interest, your balance is going to grow, right? Their RAP has a feature that it's going to be good for lower income borrowers that I'm going to talk about. But be aware that you should understand what's your interest and how much are you accumulating in interest. And if forgiveness is your strategy, then you don't worry too much about the interest because you're looking to get your loans forgiven. But if you're looking to pay off your loans as quickly as possible, treat it like credit card debt. The sooner you pay it off, the more you're going to save on interest. Now, let's talk about the RAP plan. This is the only plan that is going to be available moving forward for anyone who takes out loans, except for Parent Plus. Parent Plus cannot get access to RAP. There are some really good features about the plan. Here, your payment is based on a percentage of your income, and that percentage is dictated by your adjusted gross income. So, for example, if you made 55,000, you would be expected to pay 5% of your adjusted gross income, line 11. You can see there the monthly payment. If you made 80,000 and one, you would be expected to pay 8% of your income. And so you can see there the sample monthly payments. Now, the reason why I was saying that it could be beneficial, especially for lower income borrowers, is that there is an interest subsidy. In other words, if you're making a payment, and let's say your payment is $10, but your interest every month is $100, you will pay $10. Those $10 will go towards the interest, but then the government is going to waive the $90 remaining in interest. In other words, RAP is beneficial in that way that it won't allow your balance to grow necessarily if your monthly required payment doesn't even cover the interest. Now, if your interest is $100, but you're paying $200, then your payment is covering the full interest. There's no interest subsidy in that regard. There's also a principal subsidy of $50. that if you are making a $10 payment, they will help you by paying $40 more to get you to a $50 minimum payment. So those are two critical features. Again, my biggest concern is that generally benefits people who are on the lower income, which is great. It gets a little more tricky with higher income. How do we define higher income? We are in New York State. I no longer try to define higher income because you could easily be making six figures, and with the cost of housing, childcare, we can all consider ourselves lower income. But you can see here and get a general sense for purposes of RAP. As I mentioned, I keep mentioning that 80,000 threshold where I feel like RAP becomes more expensive. RAP has a different formula. I'm not going to go into the formula beyond this webinar than the other income-driven repayment plans. I think it's going to be okay, but as time progresses, because it doesn't get adjusted for inflation, it may become a more and more expensive plan. Okay. This was a little bit of a PSA for Parent Plus loans. The boat may have sailed by now, but who knows? If you have direct Parent Plus loans, again, you're going to get our contact information. I'm sure my staff are going to be telling me that they're getting a lot of inquiries tomorrow, but you need to talk to someone because generally for your loans to consolidate, you need 4 to 6 weeks. July is around the corner. It's next week. Now, is it possible for you to submit a consolidation and beg the servicer to process it? Maybe, but it's going to be tough for them to process it within 1 week. However, you should still reach out because we want to explain to you what it looks like for you. And if you still want to try it, we're happy to give you guidance on that. For anyone who did meet the deadline or who's going to meet the consolidation deadline, if they want to enroll in a payment based on income, as I mentioned, they would need to enroll in ICR, make one payment. This is the rule. I don't make those rules. And then you can switch into IBR, which should be more affordable. The deadline for those people who consolidated their Parent Plus loans before July 1st is 2028. So you get 2 years in case you want to do that. I think for the most part, Parent Plus loan borrowers who are consolidating to meet this deadline are going to switch into ICR and then IBR because they really cannot afford a standard repayment plan. I have said this like a million times, but I'm going to say it again. After July 1st, Parent Plus loan borrowers, whether you're taking out a new loan or you have direct Parent Plus, meaning you didn't consolidate, you're no longer going to have access to a payment plan based on income, and you're no longer going to have access to public service loan forgiveness or income-driven repayment forgiveness. So that is really unfortunate, but that is the new framework that we're operating as a result of HR 1. I'm gonna go really quickly here. I think the big thing about consolidation at this point, and I should have put a big warning sign, do not consolidate unless you get advice at this point. If you consolidate moving forward, even after today, you're gonna be trapped into, if you're consolidating and you have your loans, into RAP or the new standard plan. If you're a Parent Plus loan borrower, again, reach out. Different reasons we need to talk. But do not consolidate unless you get advice. Now, there's a lot of misinformation out there. Like we are hearing still that some people pursuing public service loan forgiveness are being told to consolidate their direct loans. Get advice before you consolidate because you're going to miss out on legacy repayment plan options that you don't want to. Now, if after a consultation and you understand pros and cons, you decide to do it, we're happy to help you. It's very straightforward. So just be aware, consolidation is something that we used to do frequently for various reasons. The big takeaway right now is you would have to do it with caution. And this was prior guidance for Parent Plus loans. You can still review that. Again, my takeaway today is going to be reach out for us to really understand the landscape for you individually. There may be parents, like I had a client today whose loan balance was 20,000 in a Parent Plus loan. We didn't need to consolidate. They can repay that in the new standard plan if necessary, or the traditional plan that they should have access to. I'm almost done, I promise you. So the number one question I often get asked is, which one is the best repayment plan option? And my answer is, well, it depends. What is your strategy? Because without knowing your strategy, I cannot tell you which repayment plan is best for you. And after helping hundreds and thousands of borrowers, we came up with 3 strategies. The first one is pay off your loan balance and treat it like credit card debt if you're able to do that. The sooner you pay it off, the more you're going to save in interest. For that, you can enroll in any of the repayment plans as long as you know that you want to pay it off and that you have a timeline. You can use any calculator out there to estimate how much would you have to pay per month if you wanted to pay it off in 5 years, in 7 years, right? Traditionally, when you finish school and you finish the grace period, you are enrolled in what we call a 10-year standard plan. Moving forward, the new standard plan is going to depend on your loan balance, right? The new tier standard. So you really need to understand that if you're going to be paying this off, then that should be your goal. And the sooner you do it, the better. Now, I recognize that for a lot of borrowers, even if you have a few $1,000s, that may be a struggle where paying it off aggressively is not possible. I recognize that those who went to graduate school, that is just not going to be possible, right? Like you can spend a lifetime trying to pay it off and not be able to pay it off because you may have 200,000 and the interest is accumulating. So in that case, we highly recommend that you explore forgiveness programs. The 2 forgiveness programs that are very popular are public service loan forgiveness. So if you work for the government nonprofit, you could pursue that, or income-driven repayment forgiveness. Income-driven repayment forgiveness means that you pay your loans based on an income-driven repayment plan, and you would get forgiveness anywhere from 2025 and under wrap 30 years. The goal, if you're pursuing forgiveness, is to understand the requirements and track your progress. You want to see the light at the end of the tunnel. If you're pursuing income-driven repayment forgiveness or public service loan forgiveness, your best repayment plan is going to be the cheapest plan available based on income, your income-driven repayment. IDR, income-driven repayment, is the umbrella term. And under that, you have like IBR, pay, ICR, and in the near future, wrap. So again, if you're pursuing forgiveness, your goal is to pay the minimum required under the payment plan required until you get forgiveness. Now, the last one, which sounds a little odd, but we do talk about it, especially when people are retired older, and that is pay the minimum required to keep your loans in good standing until you die. And the reason why we say that, we have clients that are 75, 80 years old, and if they wanted to pay it off, it will take them another 20 years. Guess what? They're not going to be able to pay it back in their lifetime. And rather than try to put the very little that they have towards this loan that it's not going to end during their lifetime, we want to make sure that they have access to food and shelter as a priority. In that case, we just say choose the cheapest repayment plan in order for you to have them in good standing. Really quickly, I want to be mindful of time, and we have like 5 minutes. Income-driven repayment forgiveness, this is what we call eventual forgiveness. Under IBR pay ICR, forgiveness would be 20 to 25 years. I won't get into the details. Under wrap, it's going to be 30 years. Now, if you are accumulating credit towards eventual forgiveness under IBR pay or ICR, you don't lose that credit if you transfer to wrap, but any credit that you earn in wrap cannot be converted back to IBR. So let's say for IBR, you would pay for 25 years and then you switch over to wrap. If you wanted to go back to IBR because wrap is 30 years, you wouldn't be able to transfer that credit over to IBR. I know this is probably beyond the basics. Reach out to me if you have questions about eventual forgiveness. A lot of people actually have more credit towards eventual forgiveness that they might not know about. FSA is expected to put on your studentaid.gov account a tracker for IDR forgiveness. We do have a back-end link that we use sometimes to give people a sense of where they're at. Now, IDR forgiveness is going to make sense either for people who have been repaying their loans for a long time, or people who say, you know what, I'm going to die with this debt. Let me see if I can eliminate it within 25 years, 30 years, or 20 years in the current versions of the plan. Every individual is going to be different. Now, public service loan forgiveness, I already mentioned. You need to be working full-time for a qualifying employer. A qualifying employer could be a federal, state, local government agency, or a 501c3 nonprofit organization. You usually have to have direct loans and be paying on an income-driven repayment plan like IVR, ICR, PAYE, and in the future RAP, or the 10-year fixed standard repayment plan. Just know IDR is probably going to be your way to go. And you have to work an average of 30 hours per week. You could be working multiple qualifying employers and bring it all together. You make those 10 years worth of payments, you certify your income, you track your progress by using the PSLF help tool. The PSLF help tool is great because then you verify your employment and then you can see the light at the end of the tunnel. You can see how many credits you have. Do not wait, and I will beg you, if you're pursuing public service loan forgiveness, do not wait until you meet the 10 years worth of employment for you to file the paperwork, because you're going to lose out on payments. Remember, student loans get transferred from one servicer to another. Unfortunately, that is the reality, and there are accounting and tracking errors. So you want to be pursuing PSLF and tracking your PSLF progress. You can learn more about PSLF on our website and FSA. As I mentioned, there are other more forgiveness and discharge programs like total and permanent disability. So if you have a chronic health condition, you might be eligible for discharge. On studentaid.gov, you can go under loan forgiveness and you're going to see a host of other forgiveness and discharge programs. So feel free to look at those and read the eligibility criteria. Other programs include, for example, teacher loan forgiveness. So feel free to explore those forgiveness programs. The key for any federal forgiveness program is to make sure that you understand the requirements and track the progress. Delinquency and default, really quickly, if you do not pay your student loans after 270 days of missed payments, 9 months to a year, your loans are going to default. That's going to impact your credit. Your credit is going to be hurt the moment you are delinquent, and that gets reported. Everyone, except for people on the safe forbearance, should be back into repayment, or unless you're still in school. The federal government is expected to start wage garnishment, don't quote me on it, probably next year. The earliest would be the end of the year, but they may also be intercepting tax refunds. For you to cure a default, that can take anywhere from 2 months to a year with rehabilitation. The takeaway is logging into your studentaid.gov, logging into your servicer account. If on studentaid.gov you see a banner that says your loans are in default, reach out to us. We want to help you get out of default. Getting out of default, 2 ways: loan consolidation, loan rehabilitation. The problem with loan consolidation now is that if you do it, you may miss out on some of those more generous income-driven repayment plan options. So we're going to be advising clients on a very one-by-one basis because we want to make sure you select the right strategy. This is our contact information. If you need additional help with your loans and your situation, you can book your own appointment online. Please know that demand for services are very high. So if you're trying to book an appointment, you're not seeing availability, you can try the next day. Usually things open up every day. But if you have something urgent, like you're a Parent Plus loan borrower, don't wait to book. Call our helpline and explain your situation, and we'll try to fit you in as a priority case. We will try to make room for you to be able to do the one-on-one. You can also email us. You can email us with any questions that you may have. And again, we are a free program. We are funded entirely by New York State, and we're here to assist you. Thank you so much.
Wow. Wow. Kind of makes me want to go back to school. No, that's good. Thank you. Thank you so very much for such helpful, useful information. And I will say this, so I know it's been some time, but again, very informative. Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez. Thank you very much. So again, her contact information is here. And if you have any questions, contact our office, Congressman Paul Taco's office, or straight to the website that she leaves here at edcap@cessny.org. So we will say goodbye. And again, thank you. Thank you very much for this information. Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez.